Hey, friend, are you feeling overwhelmed by emotions, especially in parenting, marriage, or work? Then listen up. I love helping women learn and implement powerful emotional management tools in a small group environment so they can handle everyday feelings with more calm, more clarity, and more confidence. It's called the Emotional Confidence Club. And right now, we're open to new members. If you're ready for more peace and less stress in your life, apply now for the Emotional Confidence Club at aliciamichelle.com/club. Hi there. Welcome to today's episode of the Christian Mindset Coach with me, Alicia Michelle. This is part 3 in our series on disappointment. And we're getting to the root of the root of the root, so to speak, in today's episode when we talk about disappointment. The first episode, we talked about how it could show up, like what maybe sometimes the overwhelm we're feeling, the tiredness we're feeling, it could be rooted in disappointment and what that would look like in your life. Then the previous episode in 315, we talked about what does it sound like to feel disappointment in motherhood and marriage, which are two huge ones for a lot of women. Today, we're going to talk about the concept of unrealistic expectations. Ooh, girl, this is something that I have struggled with my entire life. I have struggled with unrealistic expectations, and I feel like God is always taking me on that next level of the journey in this area. Being somebody who struggled with perfectionism and people pleasing, that idea of the expectations putting on other people, expectations putting on myself, it can really do a number on you. And if you don't recognize when it's happening, it can definitely lead to disappointment in yourself, in that situation, like a career, a ministry, or even this unrealistic expectation of how we show up for God, how we should be is kind of always what it comes down to. The idea that I want to address today is sometimes when we're looking at disappointment, when we can consider unrealistic expectations, it's not a happy thing to discover it, but it's a hopeful thing because we are in charge of our own expectations. We may not be able to change the situation if it's involving another person and how they respond, but we certainly can change our expectations of how things are. It's not always super fun to find out that we have unrealistic expectations, but it is encouraging because there is parts of that we absolutely can control and manage. Let's talk first. What are unrealistic expectations? How do they relate to disappointment? I define unrealistic expectations as not just goals or desires, but these preloaded outcomes, kind of things that we've decided in our head of how things are going to work out. So, preloaded outcomes that we are subconsciously attaching to people or to certain moments. Because it's not just people, it can be a vacation or it could be a holiday experience together. Unrealistic expectations can create that disappointment. Expectation itself isn't bad, but these unspoken, unchallenged ones that tend to be rooted in a perfect, quote unquote, version of how things are supposed to be. It's this quiet, like termites eating away at a wooden structure. It's not something that shows up all the time, but before you know it, you're like, whoa, look at all that damage that happened. I mean, that's insane. So when reality doesn't match those unrealistic expectations inside of us, that's when disappointment hits. That's when we start to notice the signs of it. That is where we are at in this conversation today because we usually don't say these expectations, but once disappointment starts to set in, we can say, is that happening here? Because we are still holding ourselves and others to those expectations. And now we're seeing the result of that. We're seeing the fruit of that. Maybe we didn't even know that they were there. So that's a great first question to ask yourself is if you're feeling disappointment in a situation, what are my expectations of this relationship, of this moment, of this specific situation? What are my expectations? Here is an example of how unrealistic expectations can keep us trapped. I'm going to share a blog post that I wrote. I probably wrote this blog post in 2014. It's an old blog post, but it talks about the unrealistic expectations we have in marriage. We often think that if this person were to change or if this thing happened, then we would not be feeling the disappointment. That's a very common sort of phrase that shows up in relationships. And for me, that unrealistic expectation in the early years of my marriage was I thought my husband would know what I needed. I thought he would have a certain response to my needs where he would not just know it, but have this I will share more in a second, but this kind of like overly over the top response, which may be true for some men and how they would respond to their wives, but that's not the man that I married. That's not the man that I have been gifted to by God. And his personality and his responses, how God made him, is perfect for my needs in terms of marriage and how we work together. But in this area, it had bred some unrealistic expectations. It's something that I continually have to be aware of. I want to read you this blog post. You can find it. I will link to it in the show notes because it is on the blog. It's super old, back before a lot of this happened with my health, before I started dealing with the emotional side of things in more detail and working in coaching. I spoke a lot about marriage and parenting on the blog. The name of the post is Are Unrealistic Expectations Ruining Your Marriage? It's not super long, but bear with me as I read this. I have conversations all the time with an imaginary man. In fact, I'll bet you do too. You see, we develop unrealistic expectations in marriage, specifically unrealistic expectations of how our marriage should be, and especially how our husbands, quote, should treat us. On days when real married life is less than ideal, we imagine how our fantasy spouse, let's call him Prince Charming, would act in that moment. Prince Charming gives the perfect answer to our feelings, right? He says things like, "Oh, honey, you're so right. Let me draw you a bath and give you a neck massage as you tell me all about it." Prince Charming knows exactly what we need, and he is more than happy to give it to us, gift wrapped with a lovely red bow. He is completely selfless, and he's at our beck and call. And if we let him invade our mind regularly, this fantasy guy can also be a silent marriage killer. I've learned through almost 25 years of marriage that this fantasy guy that lives in my head is anything but the best man for me. For years, Prince Charming tried to trick me and give me the wrong impression about how my real husband, the one I said for better or worse to, how he should, quote unquote, treat me. Prince Charming has whispered impossibilities into my ear about what marriage should be and how my husband should respond in each situation. He has established unrealistic expectations in my heart about how my husband, quote, needs to react. He has told me, again, Prince Charming, if my husband really loved me, he would answer me in this specific way or do this specific thing. For years, these unrealistic expectations robbed me of the true joys of my husband and severely limited our marriage. I was the one who let these falsehoods take root in my heart. I was the one who said, "Oh, Prince Charming, you're right, and he's wrong. Why can't he respond the way you do?" Proverbs 14:1 says, "A wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands." Oh, how true this is. And friend, today I want to be real with you about the dangers of listening to Prince Charming and how this idealized man can slowly and inadvertently destroy the beautiful walls of your home's foundation, your marriage. That is the post that I wrote way back then. It was part of a marriage series that I was doing with other bloggers at the time. If there is an Achilles heel for me in marriage, it is the idea of the idealized husband and how he, quote, should react, seeing that Prince Charming. And so I have to, for my own self, as a filter, when I sense some things in our marriage, I have to ask myself, Am I looking at this with unrealistic expectations as if he is supposed to be this Prince Charming kind of perfect guy who never does anything wrong and who answers according to the way that I think he should respond? Or is this something that, yeah, I know we really need to talk about this? Have you had that situation happen to you where you have that in your head in your marriage? I'm curious. I would love to hear more from that on you. All right, thing here for parenting. There are so many expectations that we can feel and experience about how a kid should act, how a child should, the choices they make in their careers, the people that they choose to be involved in, the books they read, the types of music they want to listen to. I mean, and it changes in every season. Like when they're toddlers, it's like you expect them to respect you and be listeners and obey and not have a temper tantrum in the middle of the store. There's certain things that these expectations are, honestly, about how we're being viewed by other people. That's at least what I found it to be. As they grow into teens and beyond, it's kind of the same thing, but just bigger issues about life, you know? So we can have these expectations, like something saying, you know, I expected my child to behave a certain way after all that I've taught them. Whether that's a toddler, I expected them to act a certain way after I've tried to help them grow into this person, or I expected them to make a different choice when they got older. There's all kinds of expectations that could be underneath that for you. So how do we know if these expectations are unrealistic? Is it unrealistic to say, I taught you these things as a parent and I don't see them happening? Is it unrealistic to say I expect there to be certain standards in how I have interactions with my husband? You know, what is that when when it goes over from just having an expectation to something that's a unhealthy version of that? There are a couple of questions we can ask. I'm going to give you 5 of them here. First one is, did I clearly communicate this expectation, or did I just assume that they knew? And so many of our disappointments that we find, they're rooted in these unrealistic expectations that were assumptions that were never voiced. They're things that we just thought, well, I just thought that you knew that. Did I clearly communicate this expectation or just assume that they knew? That's the first question. Another one is this expectation based on who someone really is, or is it based on who I wish they were? That's kind of what that story was when I was reading the blog post, of seeing certain aspects in my husband and feeling like, oh, I wish he was more like this. And that can throw you for a loop. I mean, I feel like we have expectations of good manners and treating well and things like that. But we also need to understand that sometimes the expectation we have is a version of that person that is not possible, or it's different from who they really are. Like, that's not healthy. Third question to know if your expectations are unrealistic. You can ask yourself this: am I expecting someone else to meet a need that only God can fill? That's an important one, especially in close relationships or in marriage. There is this expectation in our society that a spouse or a significant other should fill all of our needs, should love us in quote the way we need to be loved. You know what? Our significant others, our spouses, they're humans too. And they are wired to love and be loved in the ways that God made them. We have to be real about the truth that we are given a hole inside of us that God has designed and that He's made so that it could be filled only by Him. It partially filled by relationships, by friendships, by a career, but it's never going to be fully filled unless it is in Him. And so we have to always ask ourselves, is this an expectation that I'm asking someone else to meet, but it's really the only thing, something that God can fill? Question number 4, is this expectation coming from fear, control, or a desire to protect my image? That's kind of what that parenting example I was giving earlier, that we have this desire to appear as moms who have it all together, moms who have perfectly behaved children who always listen, do the right thing, now as a mom of older kids, late teens and early 20s, when people say, "Oh, tell me about your kids," I feel this expectation to prove that my kids are doing well right now and show that they're all these things. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Let my kids be my kids. They're going to be imperfect humans. They have a lot of great qualities. Like, why is that going on? And I realized that expectation was coming from how I felt like how they were acting was a reflection on me as a person and as a parent. God has had to pull that out in me and help me work through that. So that question is important for you to consider too. Is this expectation coming from fear, control, or a desire to protect my image? Last question to ask yourself. This is one that God gets me on all the time. Would I extend the same standard to someone else? I'm laughing because I can just hear the Holy Spirit going, uh-huh. Because this is one that comes up for me all the time in marriage. So you expect him to be like this, but you wouldn't do that. So that can be an unrealistic expectation that we need to look at and consider. All right. So what can we do about it? First step is to notice and name what you actually expected, right? Kind of seeing what was behind it, why it's unrealistic, looking at it from that perspective, and then surrendering what isn't ours to control, the things that are outside of our abilities, owning our part in it is important. And then learning to reframe and come up with a different dialogue to deal with what's behind it. What is the pain that's causing the unrealistic expectation, which is giving us the disappointment? Where is that coming from? And what is a healthy way to address that pain? The pain isn't the problem. The pain is alerting us to the issue. All of the things resulting from it are ways we're trying to cope with it. The unrealistic expectation is how we're trying to cope with it. And the disappointment is the result of not having it answered. How can we deal with it in a different way? This topic is super tender, but super important for us to work through in a safe space. And that's why we are covering it for 6 weeks in the Emotional Confidence Club, starting in July and in August 2025. So if you're listening to this in real time, you can join us or apply to be a part of the Emotional Confidence Club. If you're wanting to be able to go through this in a very realistic way of figuring out how to identify it, how to look at it from a loving perspective, from a biblical perspective, from a brain science perspective. And then what do we do about it? How do we get change? How do we have transformation? I am so excited to see how this will play out for the women who go through this, because disappointment is one of those things that so many of us struggle with. How do you talk about that? How do you be that person? This is a safe place to do that. We will learn things together as a group. I will be teaching that. But then the application time, the connection time, there will be exercises within the smaller groups that we'll have. You'll be assigned to a group of maybe 7 to 10 women. And that's where you'll process, connect, and heal using the 7 tools that we use in the Emotional Confidence Club. That's our emotional confidence roadmap. And then we have a playbook where you'll be applying these things and coming up with your plan to work through disappointment in this season. If you want to stop feeling stuck in these loops of guilt, of unrealistic expectations, of disappointment, then please, I invite you to join us, aliciamichelle.com/club. All right, friend, take care. I'll see you back here for next week's episode. Bye-bye.